Hey folks, I think I'm live, but I never know when this thing starts, so I'm going to start talking anyways. And at some point, it's going to cut me in, and we're going to be going live again to talk about the introduction to permaculture. And really excited to be presenting to you guys tonight. It's a continuation of the last intro that we did. And we're gonna get into part 2. So if you haven't watched this, you may want to check out the last video. Jen will probably put that link up into the show notes or into the chat window there, so you can bookmark it and catch up on that session again. So if you're just signing in, introduce yourself, let us know where you're coming in from. If you were able to participate in the last session, I'd love to know kind of what insights you had from the first introduction to permaculture session that we did on Sunday night. That was November 8th, I think. So make sure you introduce yourself and share the one insight that you had from that first session. We're going to back a couple slides up and start. So there's a bit of overlap between session 1 and session 2. So we're going to get started on that right away. We might as well get right into the content so that you guys aren't waiting, and you can always catch up and replay some of the content after the fact, because YouTube saves it. So I'm just going to share my screen here and get into it. Okay, here we go. Hey, Helen, nice to see you from Australia. That's awesome. Must be tomorrow there. I always get kind of confused by the time difference that happens between here and there, but nice to have you on board. Okay, so now that the screen is sharing, in the last section of the intro that we taught, we were talking about produce no waste. So when the needs of a system are not met from within, we pay the price in energy and pollution. One of Bill's best quotes. And so what's common with all of the elements that we discussed in the last session, and somebody said water. And so we talked a little bit about this slide here. And so one of the most important things that Jeff Lawton taught me when I was studying underneath him was this concept of water, access, and structures. So first we understand where the water is coming from and where it's going to. And then from there, we can make decisions about how to best place access. So that's roads, footpaths, tractor paths, etc. Because basically every element in a system either wants water or doesn't want water. And so once you understand where the water is coming from and where it's going to, then you know appropriate locations for access, because access is one of those things that doesn't like water. And in fact, in Australia, most of the original roads were placed there based upon sheep paths, because sheep actually don't like water. And so wherever the sheep walked was usually not a bad location to put a road, at least from the perspective that there wasn't water there, because they don't like wet feet. So once you know where water is, then you know where access is. Once you know where access is, then it starts to open up possibilities for where structures should go. Now on an urban lot, usually there's already a house and there's already access. So you can still do a lot of that work. You can still map out the water, and then structures won't necessarily be a house, but it might be a shed, it might be a greenhouse, it might be a chicken coop, might be a tree fort, might be garden beds, et cetera, et cetera. All the same rules apply, even though we're dealing with smaller structures as opposed to entire houses. On a raw piece of land, this becomes absolutely paramount, because it allows us to figure out where our roads should go to get access to the property, and where all the structures, barns, houses, greenhouses, chicken coops, all the same stuff, but they can be located very specifically relative to these two concepts. Now, when it comes to fixing a property, if it's highly degraded, we have this saying blue, green, and brown. And this comes from Darren Doherty. First, we fix the water cycle. Then once the water cycle is fixed, we fix the plant cycle. And then once the plant cycle is fixed, long-term soil carbon, which is the brown, is a result of a functional photosynthetic cycle on the property. And in fact, the really interesting thing with fixing the carbon cycle, which comes after the plant cycle, is that when you increase the soil carbon concentration by up to 1%, you end up storing water more water on that property. In fact, a 1% increase in soil carbon increases the water holding capacity by 144,000 liters per hectare, which is pretty unbelievable. And so once the carbon cycle is fixed, then more water gets stored in the soil. When more water is stored, it allows more plants to grow. More plants create more carbon, and you get this upward spiral. And so this is really important. And so this forms the basis of all permaculture design. All of the design decisions that we make with regards to how to set up a site is formed around this concept. Now, one of the things that we do when we get onto a property is we do an assessment. So what are the water sources? So where does the water come from? And once that water comes onto the property, where is it actually going? And this is a really important analysis because it helps to inform how we're going to deal with water. Now, this is a small urban site, and this could be your rural home site, the area where we place our house. Or it could be an urban property in a city. It doesn't really matter what the scale is, the process remains the same. And so what we do is we map out, and all those arrows represent the water flows coming across the property. And most properties are set up to get rid of water as fast as it comes in. And this is fundamentally at the root of what causes drought. Drought is the mismanagement of water resources coming onto a property. And so our job as permaculture designers is to slow, store, and sink that water into the ground. And we do that in order to kick off that carbon cycle. Now, one of the interesting things that happens in addition to storing more water when the carbon cycle gets fixed is that we end up having more soil microbes available to us. And that includes things like fungi. And so the nutrient density of our food goes up. Fungi, as I was mentioning in the last class, can increase the root surface area of a tree or a plant by up to 800 times. And so if a plant root has 800 times the surface area, when collaborating with fungi, it's going to be able to capture more nutrient. It's going to make a healthier plant, a healthier vegetable, a healthier tree. It's going to mean that you're less susceptible to disease and pathogens because those plants have some of those own defense mechanisms figured out for themselves because they've got access to the resources that they need when they need it. Just a little interesting factoid for you guys. They've figured out that plants have the ability to manage their nutrient cycle on a second by second basis. And so plants will actually charge the sugars that they're producing as a result of photosynthesis, which is the combination of sun, CO2 in the air, and water. And so through photosynthesis, plants create sugars, which build the plant itself, but they also generate something called plant exudates, which are the materials that the plant exudes into the soil as a result of photosynthesis. And these exudates feed the microbiology around the plant. And so a plant might decide, oh, I need calcium. And so it'll actually make a plant exudate that has a specific electrical charge. And that electrical charge is one of the forms, one of the ways that the plant actually communicates with the microbes in the soil. And so the charge that the sugar has may end up being a signal to the microbes that make calcium plant available. So when that specific charge of sugar gets made available into the soil, then the microbe that makes calcium plant available says, hey, I'm right here. Give me that sugar because I know you need calcium based upon the charge of that sugar. And that's the exact sugar that I want in order to be able to do what I do. And I'll make calcium plant available. Now, this is fundamentally different than how we work in industrial agriculture, because in industrial agriculture, we just assume that all the plants need calcium or phosphorus or nitrogen, and we just blanket the field with those nutrients at great expense. In fact, it actually is detrimental to the plants, and it makes them more susceptible to disease. And so it's much better to return that or relinquish power to those plants, because the plants know what they need when they need it on a second by second basis. And so when we have more soil carbon, we have more microbes. More microbes mean more diversity. More diversity means that there's a higher chance that the plants that are growing in that soil are going to be able to get the resources when they need it at the right scale with the right amount, essentially. So it all starts off with the water cycle. So once we know where the water is coming from and where we're going to, and I should just mention this picture comes out of Brad Lancaster's book, and his website's below there, harvestingrainwater.com. I highly recommend his books for rainwater harvesting, specifically for rainwater harvesting earthworks, which we're going to talk about next in today's session. And so if we think about it, a landscape that's designed to slow, store, and sink water is going to be the exact opposite of the picture that we just looked at. So all of these systems are designed to shed water. All of these systems are designed to harvest water. So we've got curb cuts right here, where the water from the road ends up in a basin adjacent to the road, feeding trees. And so now we can turn urban drool into abundance. Water gets harvested in rain tanks, and the overflow ends up in a rain garden. All of our hard surfaces are sloped to harvest rainwater into the areas that we want, where we want the water to go. And so these all end up being drought proofed. They're building that carbon cycle that we talked about and supporting those plants in unique and novel ways. None of this is complex. It just requires us to change the way that we think about water on our properties. So we're going to talk about a series of rainwater interception elements. So these are things that are going to intercept water from source to sink so that we can put that water to productive use and again, build that carbon cycle. So we're going to talk about rain tanks, swales, curb cuts, wicking beds, ponds, and constructed wetlands. So just a little bit of a plug. Michelle and I wrote a book on rainwater harvesting, a guide to home scale system design, and you can find that at newsocietypublishers.com. Jen can put a link up into the chat window. If you are looking to build a rainwater harvesting system, we're really proud of this book just because it took a long time for us to write it, but we wanted to try and provide something that was unique to the world in the space of rainwater harvesting. And so we actually wrote a book based upon the best practices of rainwater harvesting, regardless of what kind of codes you have in your local country. You can use the science in this book to create a rainwater harvesting system anywhere on the planet and harvest clean rainwater, which is suitable for potable use. Every code is going to have different requirements with regards to what you might need from a filtration perspective or how you treat your rainwater. But this book was based upon the largest epidemiological study of rainwater ever produced on the planet, which is Australia, where over 6 million people use rainwater on a daily basis, 3 million of them without filters, and none of them seem to get sick. And so we detail out how to build a rainwater harvesting system. Then I'm going to go through a few of those things tonight. But if you want to get into the real nitty-gritty details of how to do that, you might want to check this book out. And so every rainwater harvesting system has a series of components that, when combined together in the right way, create high quality drinking water. And so number one, we've got to have a good roof surface. And typically we recommend steel. One of the best types of roof surfaces is actually a galvalume roof. And so this is a combination of zinc and aluminum. It's a very inert alloy, and it's really good at collecting clean rainwater. In the cold climate, we like to recommend these little diverter valves. And so in the wintertime, we divert the rainwater or snow melt into our rain garden, which is right over here. And then in the spring, summer, and fall, we collect that rainwater into a rain head right here, which is basically just a screen on a 45-degree angle. It takes any debris that's been collected in the gutters of the roof, and it diverts them. Now, a lot of people like to put these rain or first flush diverters on there. The research actually does not support the use of first flush diverters. They actually don't seem to have any influence on the quality of the rainwater, and I'll talk about why here in a second. We then want the water to go into the tank, and we usually recommend a quiet inlet. And so this makes sure that it doesn't, the water comes down and gets split up, and it doesn't stir up the bottom. You can also use a basket at the top, which makes it seem like the water going into the tank is more of a rain as opposed to a thick flow of water. And so the basket basically disperses the energy of the water into the tank. And again, the function is to not disturb the sludge layer that accumulates on the bottom. And it turns out that all these studies that I just mentioned found out that one of the main reasons that rainwater is so clean coming out of a properly designed system is that biofilms form on the surface of the tank on the inside. And when studied, they found that they looked at the metal concentration of these biofilms when compared to the metal concentration in the middle of the tank, as well as some other toxins. And in one of the studies that we reference in this book, the water column in the middle of the tank had a lead concentration 300,000 times less than the lead concentration of the biofilm formed on the surface of the tank. And so they looked at nickel and lead and arsenic and various metals, and the same pattern kind of emerged every single time. And what they were finding was that the biofilms were actually hyperaccumulating the metals in the water. And even though they were in low concentration, in terms of the amount in the waters, and they were in high concentration relative to the water, what this was indicating to the scientists is that the biofilms are actually remediating the water and acting as a form of filtration system. And so we actually want to encourage the biofilms, which is why we don't want to put chlorine or any kind of disinfectant into these tanks. We want to create an environment that is healthy for these microbes, which is what we're doing by using a metal roof and a rain head right here. It also turned out that the sludge layer acted as in a very important way as well. The sludge actually helped with that bioaccumulation of those metals and toxins in the water. And so both the sludge and the biofilms played an important role in clean rainwater harvesting systems. So very interesting there. We want an overflow. And so the overflow skims the top surface layer of the water, and it sends that water to a rain garden or a swale or some other water harvesting feature. And this is really important. We don't want the overflow to be wasted. And so we send it off into another water harvesting element. We use the overflow as a resource. We want a level so we can see how much water is in the tank. We want air to be able to come in and out of the tank without allowing mosquitoes in. So we need a screened air inlet. Most of these rain tanks now have an air inlet in the actual tank itself. And so air can freely pass through the vent in the lid. But if it doesn't have a vent in the lid, then you'll have to add a vent. And then we want to have an outlet at the bottom of the tank. This should be 6 inches off the bottom of the tank, and you can just draw your water from there. Or if you want, you can put a floating inlet, which will draw the water from the middle of the water column. It's your choice. But the research shows that just 6 inches off the bottom is more than sufficient. Then that should feed a pump, but first we go through a little Y strainer, which filters the water just a little bit before it goes into the pump, and then the pump sends water off to whatever source you want. Or even better, what you can do is set your tank up above grade if you can build a strong enough stand, and then you've got gravity flow water on your property, which is what we're doing on our farm. Now, swales are water harvesting earthworks that we can put into our zone 1, our small scale permaculture property, like right around our house, as long as they're 10 feet away from the foundation. So we don't want to infiltrate water close to our foundation because we can cause damage. Or we can put swales out into the broad acre, and they look a little different than this type of a swale, but the purpose is still the same. And the idea is that we harvest water and we infiltrate it into the ground in order to feed the plants at the root level. So in the broad acre, swales have the same sort of layout, except there's no gravel or mulch where the water accumulates. They're just an open ditch that happens to be on contour. And as a result of that, water accumulates in this ditch across the landscape and infiltrates and creates a lens of water underneath the swale. And so the swales end up becoming fantastic systems to grow trees and shrubs, and we can do this on contour, so right across our property. And these things have been known to recharge wells and aquifers. They also make for drought-proof pastures and drought-proof forest ecosystems, and they can help to rebuild that water cycle rapidly. So here's an example of a swale in our back garden in Calgary. And again, all we did was we just dug a ditch. The ditch was basically dug level all the way through and was big enough for us to put a wheelbarrow through it. And it bordered the garden beds, which in this garden bed here was double arm reach. So I could reach into the middle of the garden bed from the sidewalk, and I could reach in the middle of the garden bed from the path, which is right here. This is the same path right here. And that meant that I didn't have to step on my garden in order to be able to use it. And then underneath the mulch, we put weeping tile, so a perforated pipe, which consumes or absorbs all of the water coming off of our roof surface. And so we subsurface irrigate these pathways, which then feeds the gardens adjacent to the actual pathway itself. And this wood mulch over time decomposes, and it puts nutrient into the soil as it decomposes. And so what we do is we just end up continually adding mulch to those pathways. And as it decomposes, the soil gets better and better adjacent to it, all while maintaining a drought-proof garden. So that's how swales look on the kind of zone 1 inner space around your house. Now, the next water harvesting element that we're going to talk about are curb cuts. And curb cuts are a really neat idea for urban dwellers, but you could theoretically use this on your rural acreage as well. Every road surface is basically like a roof. And so our road surfaces are going to shed water because they're designed to be impervious to rain. And even a gravel road has a pretty high water shedding coefficient. 70 to 80% of the water that falls on a gravel road will actually shed off of a well-built gravel road, which means that they're a water harvesting opportunity. And so we can create water harvesting features adjacent to our roads. And in this case, they are curb cuts. And so what we do is we build basins adjacent to the road. So as the water is flowing down the road, it takes a left-hand turn, fills these basins up. When the basin is too full, it just back floods through the curb cut off into the next one, and then off into the next one, and then off into the next one. So you can end up having these, they're basically just smaller, not as long swales that you can use to plant trees with. And they take advantage of the water shedding capacity of the road. Now, in doing this, they end up cleaning up stormwater, and they create these drought-proof tree systems that you can grow alongside roads, which will reduce urban heat island effect. It reduces the amount of water that has to be pumped to these systems, and generally makes these drought-proof systems. And so any gravel road could have these beside it. Any pavement road could have these beside it. And it's just one of my favorite systems. They're so simple to produce, and it has such a beneficial impact to creeks and rivers, because you end up infiltrating that stormwater, which means all the toxins that would normally end up in our rivers and creeks end up in soils. And soils have this amazing ability to bioremediate water. So all those microbes, those same microbes that we were talking about in the rain tanks, exist in soils and can accumulate those toxins that are in stormwater and hold them in suspension in the actual topsoils themselves. Now, another water harvesting feature, it's a kind of a more of an indirect water harvesting feature, is a wicking bed. And I like wicking beds when they're placed adjacent to homes. So where you can't put a swale right next to your foundation, you can use a wicking bed. And so a wicking bed is a water savvy way of gardening when you're gardening close to your foundation. And so basically you create a raised bed, you line it with poly, you put a weeping tile into the bottom, you put some gravel in there, and then you put a landscape fabric over top of the gravel, and then you fill it up with soil. And as a result of that, the gravel, this pipe connects into that weeping tile, which then fills the gravel with water. And then as the gravel and water sit in the bottom there, they actually soil. And so you get this subsurface irrigated wicking bed. And I have one of the definitive articles on how to design wicking beds on my website. Jen can head on over there and grab that link for you guys, so that if you want to check out our article on how to build wicking beds, you can do so. It is one of the most read blogs on our website. I spent a lot of time detailing out that blog. And so you'll find all the information there that you need on how to design and build a wicking bed. So check that out. Now we're just about halfway through tonight's session. And so I just want to mention that we're doing this introduction to permaculture because we are launching the 2020 online PDC, which starts on November 24th. Registration's open for 2 more weeks. And if you are contemplating getting into permaculture because of the craziness of the world right now, now's the time to do it. This online course only happens once a year, so the next time it's going to happen is November of 2021. We've made it really affordable for folks so that you can get into permaculture at about half the price that it would normally cost if you were to take an in-person course. And the reason it's less money is because we're delivering it online, so our costs are less, and so we can afford to pass a discount along to you guys. And the world is literally going insane right now. And one of the best ways that you can ensure yourself against that insanity is to start taking control of your supply chains. And right now we're talking about food supply chains with this wicking bed. We need to help people, both ourselves, but also the people around us, get insured against what might happen from an energy, food, water, and shelter perspective. And that's really what the permaculture's course is designed to do. It's the design of regenerative human habitat. So building homes, acreages, and farms that will actually feed, shelter, and heat us by working with nature as opposed to against her. And that's the whole premise behind permaculture. It's a huge subject. It takes about 72 hours to fully describe it to anybody. But if you're sitting on the fence, you may want to head over to our website and check out the permaculture design course page, which Jen will put up into the show notes for you guys, so that you can take a peek at it. If you have any questions about that, feel free to send us an email at info@vergepermaculture.ca. Let's keep going. So principle number 4 is capture and store energy. And so we've talked a little bit about rainwater harvesting and the different features that you can use to harvest rainwater. There's literally a plethora of different rainwater harvesting options that are available to you. We go into a ton of detail in our course on that. Like I mentioned earlier, Brad Lancaster's book on rainwater harvesting is a great one. I highly recommend Bill Mollison's book here, The Design Manual, or even his Introduction to Permaculture. Those are really good resources as well. Now we're going to talk a little bit about how to set up our site to use the least amount of energy possible. So most properties and small mixed farms that I visit are spread out too far. They have elements in the wrong place, and they make up for poor design and labor in drudgery and also massive amounts of energy. So step 1 is that you want to build a map and understand flow. And so this can be on a small property, but it can also be on a large property. And so this was a property that we worked on where there were 2 farms. And so there was one main farm, and then there was another farm further away. They're both beautiful properties. But in order to manage both of these properties, it required an enormous amount of driving between the 2 of them. And this consumed enormous amounts of time in order to do this. And so when you start adding up all the time that you have to spend transiting between places on your property, you realize that you're spending a lot of your life energy in transit versus actually doing stuff. And so on our own properties, we want to understand a map, and we want to map out the path that we're walking every single day, or driving for this example. And then you want to add up all the paths in feet meters. And then you want to multiply it times the number of days of the year that you end up walking. And then if it's in meters, you can divide by 1,000 and figure out how many kilometers you're walking to manage your eggs or your compost or your garden or whatever. And if it's in feet, you can divide it by 5,280 feet in order to figure out how many miles you're walking. Now, inevitably, somebody will say, well, it's good exercise. And it is good exercise. However, we only live for 600,000 hours, and anybody that's lived on a property where you're trying to grow as much food as you can using your own labor knows how little time there is to get all the work done in a day. And so we have this saying in permaculture that work is just a failure in design. And so if you're doing a lot of work, you need to look back at the design. And this is one of the processes that we recommend that people do in order to kind of have insights about how much transiting they're doing and try and minimize it. And I'll give you another example. We would never design a kitchen where the sink is in the kitchen, the fridge is in our bedroom, and the stove is in the basement. It wouldn't make any sense. We'd be constantly walking between those 3 elements. And so everybody knows that when you have a well-designed kitchen, you have something called a work triangle, so that you can move between those 3 elements effortlessly in order to be efficient at cooking food. Yet when we look at how properties are designed, we literally, most of the properties that I show up at have all of those elements in different locations, and you're constantly moving between all of those different places, which makes the management of those systems very difficult. So there's lots that can be done just by managing kind of where relative location of one thing to another. Now, if you are designing a property, you may want to go over to contourmapgenerator.com and check that out. We actually have an app that allows you to produce a contour map of your property no matter where you are in the world. And so you may want to go check that out and see if the map available there is any good. Different parts of the world have different resolution, and so you can preview the map on this app before you purchase a map. But what's really cool about this is that if you do end up getting a map, you can then take that map into Google Earth Pro, which is a free program, and what we recommend most people do their design on, because Google Earth Pro is free. And so you can draw those lines and polygons, and there's really only about 4 functions on Google Earth Pro that you need to know in order to be able to produce a good design. So you may want to check that out if you haven't checked out Google Earth Pro. Step 2, we want to do a sector analysis. And so sectors are energy flows that come across our property that we're either trying to shelter against or enhance. So wind would be an example of something that we want to reject. And so there are elements that we can place onto our property that help us to reject that wind. Things like shelter belts. So once we know that the wind comes in from the west and the north, typically what we do is we set up something that's going to reject the wind from the north and the west, at least in the northern hemisphere anyways. When we get into the southern hemisphere or into the tropics, we actually want to map out where those winds come, because usually we want to enhance those winds to help dry out our house. But in the northern hemisphere, we want to block those winds from our property so that they're not creating cooling or consuming too much water from our plants. We want to basically, winds are generally not great for fruit trees and vegetable gardens. They can increase the energy consumption of your house by up to 50% if you have a lot of wind blowing against your home. So we really want to understand wind. We want to understand how summer moves through the property in the summer and also in the winter. And so there's a really great app you can use to do that. It's both on Android and iPhone. I always forget the name of it. And maybe Jen can find a website for this. It's called Sun Surveyor, and it uses an augmented reality camera that helps you to figure out where your sun paths are. And so you can look at where the summer sun angle is and where the winter sun angle is, and you can see how that angle moves across the camera, because it's an augmented reality camera, in order to figure out if trees are going to be in the way, or if you have to put more trees in a specific location to create more shade. So sun is a sector that we want to think about. Noise is a sector. So if you've got a really noisy road next to you, you may want to place certain elements to try and block some of that noise out. Or you may want to re-insulate your home or choose different windows in order to keep it quieter in your home. There can also be a view sector. So a lot of people have views that they like to look at. And so you may want to map out the views that you enjoy so that you can make sure that you don't put the wrong elements in the wrong place. So sectors kind of represent the trump card in permaculture design, because we want to make sure that we're locating elements relative to their water needs. Either they want it or they don't want it. Gardens, for example, need water, but they also need access to sun. Food forests need water and they need access to sun. Both food forests and gardens, while they need water and access to sun, they don't want wind. And so as you start mapping out the sectors, and you've mapped out the water and you've mapped out the access, all of a sudden you start getting these layers that show up on your permaculture design. And what's really cool about it is if you do a good job mapping out all these different layers, all the different energy sources, water, access, then the structures start to place themselves. And the design starts to pop out of the page all on its own. And so we use these tools, sectors specifically, as one of those layers to help us to make design really simple. And so the way that we do this is, once we've got a base map, and we know where north is, we start mapping out our sectors relative to north, east, west, and south. Sometimes those sectors can also be not based upon north, east, west, or south. So like we might have a little blob somewhere in the property where there's a lot of shade. Okay, so that might not be relative to a compass, but it might just be a specific geographic location on the property. And so there's different ways to graphically represent sectors on a property depending on what you're trying to map out. The next thing that we do, and one of the next layers that we look at is zone analysis. And so in permaculture, there's 5 main zones, from zone 1 to zone 5. Now, zone 1 is the zone that usually surrounds our center of energy. And for most properties, that's it's going to be the house. But it doesn't necessarily mean that anything that touches the house is going to be a zone 1. It means that where we enter and exit our house on a regular basis is where we're probably going to have our zone 1. So in this particular case, the driveway was a zone 1 because the cars come in every day and go out every day. And so this might be a really great place to have a small little fruit hedge or some raised bed planters, for example, so that when you get out of your car, you can harvest food adjacent to your driveway as you come home from work and you go into the house and you start cooking. Or you might have a kitchen garden, which is right outside of your kitchen. Or you may end up using your swimming pool on a regular basis. And so you may want to put elements that enhance the use of that swimming pool, like berry hedges or fruit trees, because it's technically in your zone 1. You use it on a regular basis. Zone 2 are areas that you may use a little bit less often, but they're still quite high use. And so you might have a zone 2 garden where you plant things like beets and potatoes and onions, things that you plant once and kind of forget about because they mostly take care of themselves. Zone 3 is further away from your center of energy, and so you might have a food forest away from your center of energy. And so we may go to this once a week sort of thing. And then maybe adjacent to the food forest, in this particular case, we have a natural swimming pool that we use. And so we can walk outside, go through our food forest, and then have this pond, which acts as water harvesting. It creates microclimate because south is over here where our solar panels are. So it creates microclimate. It creates reflection for the food forest. And so we can get enhanced food production out of it. And so zone 3 in this particular case is for our food forest. You'll also notice that there's a chicken coop right here. And so we have brought our chicken coop close to our zone 2 because we want to get eggs there every single day. But our chickens then can get access seasonally to the zone 2 garden. They can also get seasonal access to the zone 1 garden, but then they have the ability to get access to the food forest or multiple paddocks around the property that they can manage at different times of the year. So they got lots of room to roam. They can go and forage in all these different areas. They can do garden cleanup or garden preparation in the fall or the spring by scratching the earth and also manuring it. And it's nice and close with good access to our kitchen so that when we want to go collect the eggs, it's really not that far away. But far enough away that there's still a bit of space between us so that we don't necessarily hear them all the time, but not so far away that they're kind of on the edge of the property and it becomes a pain in the butt to manage them. And so zones become really important. And so now you can see that with sectors, we understand the energy flows coming onto the property. So certain things want certain energies, certain things don't want certain energies. The zones help us to think about our proximity of specific elements based upon the frequency of use. Water gives us indications with regards to kind of where water is and where we can get access to it. You'll notice that we've got rain tanks coming off of the roof here. We've got a rain tank coming off the roof here. We've got a rain tank coming off the shed roof right here. And so wherever we got water, we've got a need for water. So this rain tank can feed this garden. This rain tank can feed this garden. And this rain tank, we can kind of send it wherever we want to send it, depending on where there's need. And then we've got this giant rain tank, which is this pond right here, which fills up from overland flow. And in this particular example, this property got quite a bit of rain on an annual basis, so it would probably just fill just from rainfall alone. You'll also notice that we put the solar array on the very south side of the property because this is where the best sun access was. It didn't make sense to put solar on the roof here because it would be shaded by all of these existing trees. Now the fifth zone, so zone 4 I didn't talk about. Zone 4 is further away than zone 3. Zone 3 is further away than zone 2. Zone 5, though, is an area where we do nothing. And so we go into nature and we learn how she works, and then we bring those insights back into what we do. And so in an urban property, that might be the local park, kind of the area that's being naturalized. On a rural property, there'll be sections of your property that you just don't touch, and you watch it go through its own stage of succession. And so these are areas where we watch how nature does things, and we bring her intelligence back into the way that we work on our property. So we've got a few more slides left to go here, guys. If you have questions, please feel free to put them up into the chat window, and we'll address them towards the end of today's session. Jen is curating Q&A so that I can go through a list once we're done, and then I'll make sure that I get those questions answered for you guys. Okay, so this is the design here. It just doesn't look as pretty, so we'll keep going on. There's the design without any of those layers. And so using all those layers allowed us to get really clear on how to place all of those elements. So sitting at our back doorsteps, all we need to live a good life lies about us. Sun, wind, people, buildings, stones, seabirds, and plants surround us. Cooperation with all these things brings harmony. Opposition to them brings disaster and chaos. And that's really the essence of what permaculture is trying to do, is to try and bring harmony and collaboration with the ecosystems around us. And it's a really self-interested thing to do. We want to do this so that we have abundance. The way that we're currently doing things creates a lot of scarcity and fear. And I think that's one of the reasons that we're so, there's so much anxiety right now in the world, is that we are basically reaping what we've sowed. We've created a world that is full of anxiety because everything's just on time. Anything goes wrong with the food system, the whole food system can collapse. Same with the energy system. Right now we're seeing, job losses and people trying to figure out how it's crazy. We don't actually ever have to have a conversation about collapse. We all know intrinsically that collapse is really not that far away, because so many of the systems, the supply chains that we depend upon are so fragile. And so you don't need to know what the thing is that will break the camel's back. You just need to know whether the system is fragile, resilient, or anti-fragile. And I think if I put that question out to you guys, I think you'd all agree that our food system, our energy system, our shelter system, our water systems, they're all fundamentally fragile. And any number of things could be the thing that breaks that system. And the problem is that because we've all been fed this story that we need to be specialists, you need to be an engineer, an architect, a plumber, a carpenter, and you need to specialize in that in order to make enough money to be in demand. And some of that is very true. Specialization is very important. But the cost of specialization is the loss of general skills, the ability to grow your own food, the ability to harvest rainwater, the ability to fix things, the ability to connect with neighbors. All of these things are important to being anti-fragile, to being able to pivot in situations that we find ourselves in right now. And this is the essence of permaculture. Permaculture is about building generalists that know how to take care of themselves and their communities. And if all of us had a few more general skills, we would end up being a lot more anti-fragile relative to the state of the world that we find ourselves in right now. So Jeff Lawton and Nadia Lawton are two of my original mentors, and I spent a lot of time studying with them before starting Verge Permaculture. And the quote that Jeff left me with is that all the world's problems can be solved in the garden. And really what it is that we do in permaculture, the word garden is a loosely held word. It doesn't necessarily mean vegetable gardening, although that's one of the concepts that we talk about. To garden is to manipulate the ecosystem around us. It's to change the environment, but to do it in a way that enhances all life around us. And so if we look at the Arctic fox, it actually changes the environment around its den in order to encourage specific species to show up so that it has its own habitat. The beaver takes trees down and builds dams and floods areas to harvest water and to enhance the types of species that live in its area. A beaver can increase the biodiversity in its region by up to 28 times. And so yes, it has an impact. Yes, it manipulates its environment, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. It does it in a way that actually enhances the life of everything around it. And in fact, the poplars that it cuts down, which is its favorite tree, actually like to be cut down because they grow back stronger after they've been coppiced. And so everywhere we look, we find examples of species gardening. And so humans have the right to garden as well. We have the right to change our ecosystems. The thing is that we have to do it in a way that doesn't end up shooting ourselves in the foot. And that is at the core of what permaculture design is all about. So this brings me to the end of our presentation tonight. We're going to be going through several other presentations. So we're back again on Thursday evening. We're going to be going through microclimate. So we've got a new addition to the Verge online PDC. We've got Mitch Rollick. Mitch is going to be giving you all the top microclimate hacks so that you can grow the most amount of food on your property. So make sure you join us on Thursday night at 4 p.m., 4 to 5:30. I'm going to be presenting with Mitch Rollick, and we're going to be collecting all your questions and giving you guys the dirt on creating microclimate. So check that out. It'll be on the Verge YouTube channel, 4 o'clock this coming Thursday. Let's check the date for you. I think it's the 12th. Thursday the 12th, 4 o'clock Mountain Time on the Verge YouTube channel. If you're interested in the online PDC, go to the website, vergepermaculture.ca, check out the course. We've got tons of information on there. We're going to be putting out videos on the course in the coming days on this channel, so check it out. If you have any questions, get in touch with us, info@vergepermaculture.ca. The course is for sale for another 2 weeks. It closes November 24th at midnight, I believe. We would love to have you in the program. We encourage all of our students to, once they've taken the program, to obviously go out and do stuff on their own property. But we have a lot of students that actually create businesses out of the permaculture design course. They start teaching in their local bioregions. And so if you're looking for a new career, this is a great place to start. I really feel like the tsunami is coming. And so now is the time to get on that surfboard and start surfing. Now is the time to get educated in this stuff, so that when the tsunami arrives, you know how to help your community thrive no matter what. So we're going to switch over to Q&A. I'm just going to go check out what Jen has got stored up here for me. And if you have any questions that you'd like answered, please put them up into the chat window and I'll be happy to answer them. Okay, Vita asks, is that a granary I see related to the cover of essential rainwater harvesting? So you can use grain tanks to store rainwater. There are some companies that actually sell grain silos that are lined to store rainwater. At one point, I think it was West Steel out of Olds, Alberta, used to build a rainwater tank out of their grain silos or granaries. And so I'm not sure if they still do. I actually have to call them in the not too distant future. So I will check into that, because there's a community project that I'm working on where they want to use a grain silo potentially for a rainwater harvesting storage tank. So Agalon asks what time zone I'm in. I'm in Mountain Time. So we're in Alberta. So Edmonton is usually the city that gets referenced when people want to find out what time zone we're in. Okay, are there any other questions that you guys want answered? before we sign off this evening? I'll answer anything. Is rainwater unsafe to drink? So no, not if it's stored properly. Sorry, if it's captured properly. And so going through all of the different capturing methods that we talked about in this video, so make sure you have a good, clean, solid surface, steel roof surface to collect rainwater is really important. And then making sure you have properly sloped gutters made out of the right metals. So again, galvalume is great. It can be aluminum if the waters or the gutters are sloped properly. And then a rain head, and then a proper rain tank where the water can kind of sit and settle over a period of time. So a few days is good. And then as that tank ages, biofilms form, those biofilms clean up the water. And then we want to make sure that we collect or use the water on that rain tank 6 inches above the bottom of the rainwater harvesting barrel. So that's how we do it, and make sure that rainwater is clean to drink. Sarah asks, I would appreciate more information on how to use chickens with a compost pile and how to start a food forest in an established forest property about 1/2 acre. Okay, so chickens and compost love to work together. So typically we can feed or put compost onto a pile that the chickens can have access to, and they'll get in there and they'll turn any of the food scraps into eggs and meat first. And then as a result of pecking through it, they'll manure that pile, and they'll also move it around. So they provide the labor essentially for the compost heap. And as a result of doing that, you should also be adding carbon to the system, so wood mulch or straw. And so they'll end up mixing the carbon into the system, which will get the compost reaction started essentially. And so they provide the labor, they provide the manure, and all you have to do is provide the carbon and the food scraps, and they do the rest. Once the compost is made, then you can fork it out onto the garden, and it makes an incredible amendment for your garden. So hopefully that answered that question. And then how to start a food forest in an established forest property about 1/2 acre. So if you want to transition a forest into a food forest, you're going to have to cut trees down. And so this sector analysis that we talked about and the zone analysis is really important. We want to make sure that we're putting the fruit trees close enough to your center of energy. We want to make sure that the trees that you actually have to cut down are going to open up the most amount of light possible so that your fruit trees will thrive. If you don't have enough light on your property, then you're not going to be able to get fruit trees to establish. So you will need to cut some trees down. We just had to do that on our property. We cut down a bunch of trees in order to open up light so that we could have a greenhouse and a garden. So that's how you do it. Ideally, if you're going to take those trees down, do it with an earth mover so that you can pull the root balls up and make sure that the soil is free and clear for you to be able to grow in that system. Okay, next question. Is rainwater collection illegal? So different places are going to have different rules and regulations around collecting rainwater. And so you'll have to check with your local municipality to determine what the rules and regulations are around collecting rainwater. I can tell you one thing, it shouldn't be illegal. It should be totally legal, but different states and counties have different rules and regulations around that. Danny asks, is it dangerous to use rainwater harvested off old shingles? No, it should be fine. Ideally, probably wouldn't drink off of rainwater from a shingle roof, but as far as growing food with it, it's fine. New shingles you may need to look at. A lot of the new shingles have antifungal components in them, so you'll want to just look to see what kind of products are in the shingles themselves. Slugs and Snails asks, hello, are ponds sustainable on any site? No, they're not. So if you don't have enough clay, it might be really hard to get water to stay above ground. That's the first thing. Typically you need 50% clay in order to be able to store water on the surface of a property. Number two, if you live in a really hot climate, you may not get enough rainwater or snow melt in order to be able to fill the pond in the first place. So no point building it if you can't fill it. And then number three, if that property does get enough water, but it's really hot, you might get most of the water being lost to evaporation. So we have to make sure you've got enough catchment to fill it. We got to make sure that you've got enough clay to store it. If you don't have enough clay, sometimes you can get a liner, a geotextile liner that's impregnated with bentonite clay. It can be very useful. And then you have to make sure that you're not going to lose it all to evaporation if you live in a really hot climate. So a few questions you have to answer there. Daniel asks, any suggestions on setting up your farm or orchard from a distance? The best way to protect a bunch of new fruit trees, etc., when you live around 3 hours away? Thank you. So the best time, the old saying, Chinese proverb, the best time to plant a tree was yesterday. The next best time to plant it is today. I actually don't think that that saying is right. The best time to plant a tree is when you can create the proper conditions for that tree to thrive. So if you're not living close to it, the cost of losing trees to voles and to porcupines and anything else that's going to eat it can be very pricey. So I would say focus on the systems that will support the trees and then plant the trees once you can live on that property. The best way to protect trees is dogs and cats, and maybe some traps and things like that if you're going to have voles eating bark and stuff like that. Once the trees are established, then those things tend to not bug them very much, but it can be a real pain in the butt to establish them. So you may want to focus on other systems that are less susceptible to those types of pests. Ways to maintaining grass from Mark. Well, Mark, I need more information on that question before I can answer it. I'm not against grass, but generally speaking, we have too much of it. And so usually the best way to have grass is to have less of it. You can do some neat things to grass. You can plant it out to clover and kind of put more species into the mix. More biodiversity is better than less. And yeah, I think you made a comment in terms of height. You know, cutting it less is going to require less water. And overall, though, I'm not overly expert at grass. I tend not to focus too much on growing grass, so I'm not the best guy to ask. One thing I do for my clients, though, if they do want to have grass, is I will apply compost to the lawn, and that can have a huge improvement on the overall sustainability and conditions of the grass itself. So maybe spread some compost. Okay, so when is the last day to sign up for the PDC? So the last day to sign up for the PDC is November 24th at midnight. So you've got a couple days to decide, but you'll want to get on that sooner rather than later if you're interested. What can I do with a PDC? Well, you can do a lot with the PDC. So number one, you can design your own property. So you can get your own property set up so that your own supply chains are taken care of. So food, energy, water, shelter. Once you've got your own property set up, you can start to consult if you want to. A lot of our clients go on to start their own consulting business, their design business, landscaping businesses. And that demand for that is only going to grow. I've had to take my phone number down from my website because I cannot take on any more consulting clients right now. So if you're looking for a new career, this might be a really great option for you. So you can do a lot with a PDC. What if I've never planted anything before? Can I still take the class? Absolutely. So permaculture is only partially about gardening. It's about thinking. It's about design. It's about changing the way that you look at the world. And so, yes, if you've never done any planting or gardening before, you absolutely are still, totally relevant to take the PDC. Aguilon asks, my garden is clay topsoil, about an inch. Any advice? Yep, absolutely. So no matter whether your garden is clay, sand, or silt, if it doesn't grow good vegetables, it doesn't matter what the problem is. There's one easy solution to make your garden better, and it's add compost. Doesn't matter what the problem is, just add compost, add compost, add compost, add compost. I can't say it enough. So you want to make sure you get really good at making compost, and then whenever you've got surplus compost, you add it to the garden, and it will dramatically improve the nutrient density, the drought resilience, the pest resilience, the flavor. Everything improves with compost. It's basically the probiotic yogurt for the soil. So guys, we've kind of come to the end of the hour. I'm happy to stay and answer more questions, but they don't seem to be forthcoming too much. So I think we'll close it down for tonight. We'll be back again on Thursday evening with Mitch Rollick to talk about microclimate. So finding the right microclimates and then using them to the benefit of your property. So Mitch is going to be talking about the most important components to how to find and use microclimates on your property. So make sure you check that out. That class is going to go from 4 p.m. Mountain Time to 5:30 p.m. and we'll leave room for questions at the end. And then Sunday night, we've got Dakota Cohen. He's going to be talking about livestock. So his gardening with livestock. We're going to talk about integrating livestock into your property. So make sure you bring your learning caps and your questions. And then from there on Tuesday night, we have Carmen. So gardening when it counts. She's going to take you through her best gardening tips on Tuesday night. So bring any gardening questions you've got. Now is the time to be thinking about buying seeds. We don't want to wait to the very end. So if you are on the fence about what to buy and when to buy them and where to buy them from, make sure you bring your questions on Tuesday night. And then Thursday night, I'm going to host an open Q&A session. So if you have any specific questions that you want to ask, bring them next Thursday, and I'll make sure that I bring answers. Okay, folks, I think we'll leave it at that. Hopefully you got some value out of tonight. If you did, please hit the like button down underneath the video there. That helps the video to track. If you know anybody that would benefit from a permaculture design course, please share the link with them or this video. And I look forward to hanging out with you guys real soon on Thursday night, 4 p.m. Mountain Time to 5:30 on the Verge YouTube channel. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great day.